I will be going to visit this church called Romatso de Paz, which is word, I think it's word of peace. It's something like that. This is a church comprised of hundreds of people who once were a part of a small village called Chinolito, which we will pass as we go to Sincelejo. They were driven out of Chinolito by the warring factions in Colombia. If you watch the news or read the newspaper, you know that Colombia is a nation that is just filled with violence, not only from the drug trafficking, but also from warring factions that are seeking to control the land. And it's a far more complex story than you want me to get into or will be here until your annual meeting next week. But I go to simply be present and to be with them. This whole church, this whole village was driven out by these warring factions. They are comprised largely of indigenous people, campesinos, and Afro-Colombians, who are there as a result of the cross-Atlantic slave trade, who took refuge in Colombia and now are about 8% of the Colombian population. These individuals grew up as families in Chinolito. They farmed the land. They lived in the little village, but they had land as far as you could see, up the hills, into the rainforest, out onto the plains. Beautiful land, agricultural land, that they had farmed for generations. But the guerrilla of the left and the paramilitary of the right have come in and clashed there and driven them out. And they now live in the dump of the city of Sincelejo. They literally live in the dump. Their church that I have visited is built in the dump in Sincelejo. Now, so you understand the full context, when I last went to Sincelejo, I was with a group of about 15 or 20 of us, and we traveled by bus. The bus would go around and around on these one-way streets in Sincelejo and pull up in front of our hotel. And the Colombians would get out and they would stand from the edge of the sidewalk to the door of the hotel on both sides of us. And we were instructed, you step off that bus and you move as fast as you can into that hotel, because they were so worried about our safety. Those are the conditions in which Romatso de Paz gathers this morning to praise God and to pray for peace. Yet those are not the only conditions, because this church that I'm talking about is basically posts and a thatched roof with an area that's covered with a stage, and that is their church. And to this church, people stream from all over the city. But many, many of the people live right there at the dump, because that is where they can find food to eat. It may be food that has been in that dump for days and days. It may be food that you would not even want to walk near. But it feeds them, and so they live there. There are living there right at the church the pastor and her husband, and gradually other families that come from other villages like Chinolito who have nowhere to go because they've been driven off their land. If you have farmed your entire life, what do you do when you're forced into a barrio in the middle of a city? There is no place to farm except on the dump, and they do farm the dump. It is a tragic situation, a terrible situation. But right now, there is a sign of hope. And that sign of hope is that 2 years ago, when I was able to be there, the Mennonites and our partners and we contributing some dollars through your mission dollars enabled Romatso de Paz to go back to Chinolito and to be able to buy what had once been this large villa now. By comparison with Connecticut, this large villa is not huge. But in the context of Colombia, this is a large villa and many acres of farmland. And they've bought it. and they have turned it into a farm that they are now farming. Now, I've met the cattle, and you can see every rib on this cattle. And I have met the one pig, and I am hoping that by now they've got another pig of a different gender, and soon there will be piglets. And I have met the roosters and the hens, and I have great hope in me that now Romatso de Paz will gradually be able to move back to Chinolito and be able to live in community again. But imagine if you, as the Congregational Church of Brookfield, were gathered this morning in a dump. Imagine if all your children had known was violence and fighting, because all these children have been through the experience of being driven out under gunfire. That's their life experience. And now they live in a dump in the midst of a city so dangerous that they have to line the way from the bus to the hotel for strangers who come to visit. You are one with them. Together you are God's own people. Together you are a holy nation, and it matters to their lives and to their livelihood that you care. It matters that you give in that offering plate Sunday after Sunday a little bit of money that goes so far to enable the people of Romatso de Paz to praise God and to know that they are accompanied, to know that they are not alone, that the rest of the world has not forgotten them. That's why I go on July 1 on your behalf. This time there will be only 4 of us who are going, 3 of us from Connecticut and 1 from Washington, D.C. And we will go and we will greet our brand new, only been there a year, missionary from the United Church of Christ, the very first time we've had a missionary in Colombia. And he is there working in Sincelejo with our partners because your conference annual meeting 4 or 5 years ago passed a resolution asking the National United Church of Christ to find the dollars to be able to have someone there. You know, when life is as tentative as life is in Colombia, when a leader like our partner, Ricardo Esquivia, who used to be a judge, who's trained as a lawyer, who gave up all that in order to accompany the people of Chinolito and Romatso de Paz in order to work to build a culture of peace in Colombia, that our presence, our visiting from time to time says to those powerful, violent forces, hands off, don't touch these people because the world is watching them. I would never have thought that my going to be there could mean life or death. But that's what they tell me. It does, in fact, mean life or death for them. Not in the metaphorical way that you and I might mean it. They mean literally. When I'm there, it says to all those powerful, violent forces, Ricardo doesn't walk alone. Romatso de Paz was visited by the United Church of Christ from Connecticut and from Washington, D.C. Chinolito was visited, and everything changes. All across Colombia, there are 3 million people living like the people of Romatso de Paz, driven off their land. And you are present to them. Oh, not individually. We can't reach every one of those 3 million alone by ourselves as the United Church of Christ. But through Michael Joseph, our missionary, and through Ricardo, and through the work of our partners, the Mennonites, who are only 17 tiny little churches, but whose presence is as big as the United Church of Christ in Connecticut. you are there, transforming life.